Psychedelics Today, everybody. This is Joe Moore. Today on the show, we have some very interesting guests. I am not on the show. I listened to it today in editing and was very fascinated by the discussion. Today we have James Norwood and Michelle Hobart. Kyle has known Michelle for a long time, has been doing kind of webinars, Zoominars, I think. He says the name he uses on the intro here. But yeah, Michelle's been a friend of the show for a while and done some really interesting work with Kyle. And James Hobart is new to me, but really fascinating guy. We, in the psychedelic world, owe a debt of gratitude to a psychiatrist named Artie Lang. Artie Lang pioneered a lot of psychotherapy. He was probably the most popular psychotherapist in the 70s, and it's kind of this live and let live philosophy, like what happens if you don't give shame. He was also part of this Esalen crew. Kind of intro to Artie Lang's really piss poor, but sorry about that. We get into him during the show, and James actually, I believe, is working with Michelle to put on this Gnosis Retreat Center, or coordinate what they're calling the Gnosis Retreat Center, and it's a Artie Lang inspired center where people with extreme states can go to live with people who also experience extreme states on occasion. The idea is that people who do experience extreme states like psychosis, extreme psychosis, or stuff that looks like spiritual emergence in the psychedelic world, maybe they feel crazy and they need to go be near people that are like them so that they can be accepted as part of a community. And this is an accepted model in the UK, and it's been pretty well established there. And it looks like it's going to be more established here. They're looking for donors right now and trying to make a list of people who want to move in. So they're trying to acquire a house in the San Francisco Bay Area and also just make a list of folks that want to move there. It was a really cool, inspiring story, and I hope you learned something from this episode. My kind of takeaway is that I need to read more Artie Lang. There's documentaries and plenty of books you can read to learn more about him. So on with the show with James Norwood and Michelle Hobart. But first, a little bit from our sponsor, Entheozen. Entheozen makes a number of products. Transzen is their most popular right now. It's a all-natural mood-enhancing supplement. Helps us work towards optimal brain health and resilience. And it's made up of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and herbs. It was consciously crafted to help you transcend above your low mood or difficulties reaching a relaxed, elevated state. Caitlin Thompson, the founder of the company, spent over 3 years researching this and building the perfect formula. I'm going to read you a few of the ingredients here. Maybe all of them, actually. So her website actually has a great breakdown, entheozen.com, of the scientific literature behind each of these ingredients. So you can do some research on your own to dig in here. But yeah, a bunch of B vitamins, B3, 6, 9, and 12, all fairly critical. Magnesium, which is very critical. Many of us are deficient in magnesium and B vitamins. 5-HTP, a serotonin precursor. Let me try this one. Mucuna pruriens. Seems like a bean or a pea of some sort. I don't know too much about that, but it looks like an L-DOPA related compound. L-theanine, turmeric, spirulina, blueberry, ashwagandha, passion flower, lemon balm, zinc, very critical mineral. Again, we're often very deficient in this. And black pepper. Black pepper does a lot, but it helps potentiate the absorption of turmeric into our system. So it's a really great thing. I've really enjoyed using it. I actually just ran out, so I need to get some more. If you go to entheozen.com/PT, you can order more and save on shipping. So entheozen.com/PT, free shipping for Psychedelics Today listeners. Hope you enjoy it and let us know what you think. On with the show. Bye-bye.
Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is kind of a dual purpose podcast, actually, so I'm kind of excited about it. But I'm here with Michelle Ann Hobart and James Norwood. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Michelle and I have been doing these little Zoomcast things, I've been calling them, basically around like spirituality, spiritual emergence. And Michelle tossed the idea out to get James on. James is a doctoral student over at CIIS, clinical psychology, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And we actually met at the MAPS conference, which was really cool. We ended up sitting next to each other at a MAPS integration luncheon. And yeah, nice synchronicity.
Yes, and you had mentioned Michelle, I think, in that conversation too, and so it's all coming back together.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Which is really cool. But you're working on a really cool project, the Gnosis House, or Gnosis Retreat.
Yes, the Gnosis Retreat Center,
Mm.
which is a house, so that would also be a good name for it.
Cool.
I know. So I think in the early days of the project, I would call it Gnosis House. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've been talking about it for a few years with Kyle. So, yeah.
Evolved now, Gnosis Retreat Center.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So Michelle pitched this out to me, and I was talking to Joe about it, and he was like, "This sounds like a perfect topic to get on Psychedelics Today too." So we're here, and hopefully we'll talk about some psychosis, spiritual emergence, and psychedelics, and maybe where all that stuff intersects and meets. So maybe like a little background. How about we start with Michelle, since you were on our master class actually in our integration course, talking about spiritual emergence. So maybe a little bit of background about your story and spiritual emergence or psychedelics, and then we can get James' backstory.
Great. For me, 2012 and 2013 was a big year of going into my spiritual emergence process. Really expanded states of awareness and capacity, psychic gifts, and channeling, and really a lot of amazing downloads that I'm still integrating. In 2013, I was hospitalized twice in January. So 5 years, actually, at the end of this month, anniversary of my first hospitalization. And then the second one in May of that year. Mm-hmm. And I really came to the realization that there is not a lot of alternatives to hospitalization available. And the few that are, I knew I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to be a part of finding a way to frame what was happening and to explain what was happening in another way. And, I was in PCC, Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness in 2004 to 2006. And so I was familiar with Stan Grof's work. And so I had that framework. And luckily that is, part of how I brought myself back. And with support of the spiritual emergence community, I should say communities, the Free Association at school, Michael Guy Thompson's organization through this ID department, had a showing of Artie Lang's Kingsley Hall Asylum documentary. And that was the first time. And also in my psychodynamics class, we watched a documentary on Artie Lang. And I was blown away by his amazing, it feels shamanic to me, his way of connecting and working with people. And I really was drawn in almost immediately. And so it made sense for me, especially when hearing about the Gnosis Retreat Center project, that I wanted to be a part of this community. I wanted to support it in whatever way that I could. So yeah, that's how I got involved.
Awesome. And you're also a graduate student in the counseling department over at CIS.
Right. That's also who I am. I'm actually a MFT trainee at Golden Gate Integral Counseling Center. And I am in my third and final semester of practicum, graduating in May and starting my internship and finishing my hours after that. So
congrats.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And how about you, James?
So I'm a student at CIS and at the PsyD program, and so I've been there for about 5 years now. And before that, I was actually at Sophia University for a couple of years, which a lot of people know it went through a pretty radical change. Which kind of resulted in an exodus. So then I ended up at CIS, and that's where. I should mention at Sophia University, I had met David Lukoff, and he was my dissertation chair and also my academic advisor. So from him, I was hearing a lot about soteria and these projects, and I was already getting this sense that there was this important connection between what David Lukoff seemed to be interested in with these extreme states, spiritual emergence, states that people knew as psychosis, and what I was interested in, which was psychedelics, and at the same time learning about all these kind of spiritual experiences, all these kind of spiritual teachers who all seem to be having these very altered experiences of reality that, which fundamentally didn't look totally distinguishable from like a psychedelic state or a positive or like a more chaotic altered state, an extreme state. Anyway, so I ended up at CIS. I met Michael Guy Thompson, who was a professor of mine in psychodynamics, and he was he's a really interesting guy. He's like a psychoanalyst who just has the most respect I've ever seen in a modern psychotherapist for Freud and all of these kind of older thinkers and the classic philosophers, the Greeks and all of this, and existential philosophy. He had the most respect for that, but also a different take on it all. So you could kind of understand why he would respect Freud so much, because he understood that Freud was really talking about a cure through love. And so it seemed kind of like a radical idea compared to what everything else I was hearing about Freud, which really seemed simplified. So that's just to say I was kind of enchanted with this guy's thinking. He had a real interesting way of taking a look at things. But he was also somebody who I learned later worked with R.D. Laing. And he not only worked with R.D. Laing, he was, I guess for lack of a better word, R.D. Laing's kind of right-hand man in the Philadelphia Association in London, and was kind of administered all this stuff with the Philadelphia Association, and they were the ones to put on Kingsley Hall, Portland Road, these houses, sanctuaries for people who were going through these the term these days is extreme states, these prolonged extreme states, but in a way it's hard to find something that really captures it, because a lot of what the people Kingsley who lived at Kingsley Hall, they're dealing with a lifelong kind of way of being that was pretty consistently an altered experience of reality. Mm-hmm. So there have been no real places like there have been Soteria. There have been some really interesting places since then, but I haven't heard of any places like Kingsley Hall and Portland Road where people could live there on and on and on and have a community that supported that. And that was Lang's work. That was Michael Thompson's work, and now that's the work of Gnosis Retreat Center. So that's a little bit of the background, but I don't know if I could tell you a bit more, but I feel like I've been talking for a bit now.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Maybe another intersection that we can bring up is breath work, because I'd like to just mention that one of my mentors in the Gnosis community, and someone that I really look up to, her work is Nita Gage, and shamanic breath work that she facilitates. And so in the last few years at the summer conference, we've been offering breath works during the conference as part of the offerings, which has been really, really powerful to kind of work with and move things and be with in community in these expanded states. And so I just wanted to, name that's something that I'm really honored to participate in and want to continue to develop and support in that way with the community as well. So
yeah, Nita Gage is she's kind of like a shaman of sorts,
totally.
Yeah, I think we have kind of a radical perspective on how healing can take place. So we have a lot of psychoanalysts around, but mostly what we're interested in is facilitating kind of relationships, and I think that's really at the core of it all. And I think breathwork actually is an incredible experience, not only because of it's the way it alters your state of consciousness, but also because of how you. I've only ever done it in a circle of people, in a room of other people, in the way that the shaman facilitates it, and the way that you have someone witnessing your process. I'm certain you could do some of this on your own, and I think you could reach all sorts of interesting states all by yourself. I think, but I think a lot of the juice of it is even when you do that, to come and talk to other people and to come and have some of that witnessed and become a part of your relationships.
Yeah, and even in the Groff world, the one component of holotropic breathwork is group process and being in the group.
Exactly, and like you said, the sitter, the still point, being the witness, and then also the people that walk the floor that are like there and laying hands on and moving the energies and being with them that way. Like feeling supported to move through these processes, and that it's the container and it's the support and it's all of it. And even like doing the mandala at the end, and I love it. I just love breath work. So I'm glad that we all have, experienced that and that we can.
One of the people walking around. It was very generous of you. Michelle and I think maybe 2 or 3 other people.
Yeah, Dana
and Dina Tyler, I think. They held wonderful. You all held such wonderful space with that.
Thank you so much. It's an honor, really.
It's powerful medicine.
I know Kyle has a real heart in that work as well. So,
yeah, James. So, how about we dive a little bit into like the Gnosis project? Like, what is it? What's a little bit of the background, and how did you get involved in it?
Okay, so I'm excited already with this question. Let's talk about what Gnosis Retreat Center is. So Gnosis Retreat Center is I would say it's a project at the moment, being kind of pushed forward by a wonderful community of people in the Bay Area. That's growing all the time, but most fundamentally, Gnosis Retreat Center is trying to get a house in the Bay Area that would, in some ways, be like the houses on Kingsley Hall and Portland Road, insofar as it provides just a place for a sanctuary for people to live, and have their own experience of reality, and kind of, I would say, unmolested by treatments that they don't want. And the idea is that that the community that has a fundamental philosophy of live and let live is healing, basically all on its own, which is both a simple and complicated thing.
Yeah.
I know it sounds simple. We're not doing anything, but I think it's also a matter of a matter of being resilient in your relationships with people. And how do you do that? Well, that's what we're talking about all the time with Gnosis Retreat Center. So we're talking about that with all these different events that we do. We do events and salons where we talk about existential philosophy. We talk about these wonderful works in psychology from R.D. Lang and some of these other thinkers, and we build relationships with each other, which I think is a big part of it.
Exactly. And for me, it's been such a resource to be in community in this way and to be working towards something like this. It's so powerful to see how it's grown and see how it's growing and how we're getting this momentum. And each event is bigger and brings such amazing people. And we just had an event on Saturday with Fritjof Capra, sharing about the biology of love. And it was really, really amazing. And there was a point in the evening that I was sitting in circle with other therapists and analysts, and we were really supporting one another, and it wasn't supervision. It was like support. And I feel like community, that's what community is. It's like coming together and supporting one another in these, being human together in all the ways that we show up. And, sometimes it is a really intense process to, be with or to move through these things oneself, and to have people that accept and are non-pathologizing in the way that they hold it. And, treatment is how we treat one another, right? So
yeah. Rather than what we're doing to somebody to get them to conform to an idea of what we think they should be, which I think, so that's maybe one of our great criticisms of with other forms of treatment is that they're so often a way of kind of in some ways you could say with the best intentions trying to do something to somebody. Which is I think one of the most fundamental things that differentiates what we're doing and what we're interested in. And by the way, I would also say that I think it's that this value on authenticity is what attracts so many people to our events and to our gatherings. It's an extraordinarily rare thing, I think. I think that you go to most events these days. You go to you do most things in a fairly goal-oriented fashion, and technology is kind of a way that we are constantly interested in mastering the world, being able to do more and more things. But authenticity, now that's something that's hard to come by. Authenticity, I think, has to do with being one another without contrivance. It has to do with being with one another with an incredible amount of allowance, so that we can allow each other to be as we are and still be together. I think that's the philosophy of what we think is healing, but I think it's also why so many people who have nothing to do with madness, who have nothing to do with the mental health world necessarily, though we have plenty of people in that field. I think there are plenty of people who just want to come hang out with us because
you guys are awesome.
Yeah, totally.
I think we're interested in being authentic with each other.
Yeah. Are you guys like Hillman, James Hillman?
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Just
just heard his name today.
what was that?
I just heard his name today, but tell me about it.
Oh, nice. He's just
Speaking of synchronicities, right?
yeah, he's a archetypal psychologist. He was a student of Jung, I believe, and so he kind of developed the paradigm of archetypal psychology. But something that you were saying about like treatment and trying to like treat somebody and do something to somebody got me thinking about what he said. And I don't know if I'm paraphrasing it or if it was like a quote from one of his books, but it was like the soul doesn't need treatment; it needs to be served. And so I think in the mental health world, particularly, it's like we need to treat this instead of how do we serve this person? How do we serve the psyche and what's going on internally with somebody and to meet them where they're at, right?
Yeah, I feel like the implication there is that when aspects of people's experience, there's kind of a maybe a purpose to it. So to facilitate something or to serve something is to allow. Maybe my fantasy is that it means to allow it to have a full fruition or a full expression.
Exactly. Being able to move through the process to completion. In a way, it reminds me of, sort of the hero's or heroine's journey in that way, right? Like moving through and coming out on the other side with the gifts and capacities and boons from that experience. And so often, sometimes it's cut off or stopped or just not able to continue. It's thwarted in some way. And so to be able to be given space and given allowance to go through that and still have support and still have container, like home to do that, refuge, it is so important.
Yeah, I love this kind of the moving through and what you were saying about things getting inhibited. I think that if we take kind of a radical idea here that what people are experiencing in what's being called psychosis and all of that, if we assume that instead of it being like a biological blip or error, some kind of brain glitch, it's actually something that's meaningful. Right now, to us, it's not so radical, but I think in the larger scheme of things, it is. But if you just take that assumption that someone feels that something is deeply important, and then you come along and you put them in a context where they're not allowed the space to find a way to express this thing. What are they going to do? They're going to fend you off in whatever way they can, whether it's in chaotic behavior or by withdrawing from the reality in which you're present with them. They have to do what they have to do in order to preserve this until they can find a place where they can find some expression of it.
Exactly. So there's a self-protective mechanism that's at work, as well as this soul-driven process of healing on a deep fundamental level that's happening simultaneously. And so it's part defense from the dominant paradigm itself that seems at times so challenging to continue to participate in, when what you're experiencing, say in extreme states or entheogenic states or meditative states, shows a different world, a different reality that is at odds with consensus reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you encounter some of these, there's so much that's real that's not and so much that's incredibly real, that has absolutely nothing to do with the broader consensus reality. So if you find yourself in an encounter with something like that, it wouldn't surprise me that that you're in a conflict now. Are you going to choose your relationship with consensus reality? Are you going to try to maintain your connection to this this incredible truth that feels incredibly important?
Exactly. And I would say one of the most challenging parts of my experience was being told that what I was experiencing wasn't real, or that it wasn't valid, and that it needed to be stopped, that there was something wrong, something ill about it. And although, there was definitely ecstatic states, there were definitely dark nights of the soul aspects of it. It's like I was increasing frequency in all directions, right? But I think for me, one of the great lessons, like you said, in this work is to honor and respect the other in such a deep way that we know the validity and the truth of their experience just by the fact that it's their experience. I mean, that's what I love about Lang. He's a phenomenologist as much as an existential, psychoanalyst. So I think that just these experiences and the way it lives in our body and mind and all of that. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, Joe and I actually just had a conversation last night with somebody, and we were talking about like psychedelic experiences and who's to say. We were talking about like the archetypes, and you get into those like meeting these different archetypal beings, these entities, these machine elves, whatever you want to call them, whatever you meet. Is that real? Right? And I think people get kind of tripped up there. It's like, is that real? Was that just a hallucination? Like, what was that? But like, what is real? Right? Like, what's the definition of real?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that the whole psychedelic realm in, because I'm still kind of to me, it's mind blowing that these conversations really don't intersect more often, given that you take psychedelics and you are immersed in a reality that other people aren't experiencing around you, and that may always be the case to some degree, but that's a different kind of point. But you are, and yeah, I mean, I've talked to people who have. I personally haven't met an entity in particular, but I've talked to people like that who have, and they you can say to them, well, it's certainly real for you, but I think that doesn't satisfy a lot of people. Is it really real? And it's a good question. What is real? I mean, maybe what most people mean by real is that multiple people can recognize it.
Right. Yeah. And I think from our scientific paradigm, it's like what we can like quantify and feel or see. Right.
Yeah.
So if we can't really measure that of some sort, then it must not be real. But what is experience? I mean, is the experience real for the experiencer? Right. I don't know.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say, in a lot of these esoteric traditions, they are sciences. They're the sciences of the non, of the metaphysical and of the non material. And so, when people do experience different entities, whether they're angels or Agarthans or guides from ancestral lineages or whatever, or totem animals, for example. I have a whole team that I work with, includes like all of the above, that you can find quote unquote data, right, that backs it up from these other, mystical traditions. And so there's a way that, not that it's necessary to do that, but to know that when we're in these experiences, whether it's an entheogenic experience or through yoga or breath work or whatever, that there are others also. And that's one of the things I love about communities or conferences like the MAPS conference or whatever. It's like you're coming together with people that actually do have experiences that maybe you are accessing certain realms that are doorways to certain subtle realms that these particular medicine beings are gatekeepers of in some way. So I love, I'm a believer. You know what I mean? I'm a believer in all of it. When Falcon 9 SpaceX was, going, and I'm driving through the desert and I'm like, oh my God, it's a UFO. They're here. They're showing themselves. I'm like, good, because we need that. And when people told me that it was Falcon 9, I was like, yeah, but you show me the evidence, a time-stamped, video from start to finish, I'll believe you. But otherwise, for me, it was a UFO. And the way that it affected me, you know what I mean? And so it doesn't matter. They can't take that away. In the same way that they can't take away my spiritual emergence by telling me that I'm mentally ill.
Yes.
That's not my truth.
This kind of reminds me of a story from Carlos Castaneda, where Carlos is with Don Juan in the desert, as he always is, and he sees kind of off in the distance, he sees this thing that's like a dead, looks like maybe a dead animal, but then he realizes it's not dead, it's twitching. This is all, I should say, while Don Juan is teaching him a lesson about power. So Carlos sees this creature in the night twitching, and he realizes this creature is in its death throes. And Don Juan asks him, what is it? And then Carlos says, it's a cat, I think. And he's like, no, it's too big for a cat. Then Carlos says, is it a wolf? It's like, no, too small for a wolf. And then they creep closer to it, and Carlos, and then Don Juan says, now be careful. In its death throes, a creature can have an incredible power to leap out and kill you. It's their greatest power then. And then Carlos leans forward, and then it jumps and twitches, and Carlos runs, screaming up this boulder, and then he looks back, and he looks back, and he sees that this animal was a branch. Blowing in the wind, and then he says, Don Juan, it's just a branch. It's a branch, Don Juan. And he laughs, and I said, oh, I was so stupid, Don Juan. I can't believe it was an animal. I can't believe I thought it was an animal. And then Don Juan scowled at him and said very seriously, don't think you've had any great success here today. And then he explains, you think that you've accomplished something by realizing that this was not, in fact, an animal. You've accomplished nothing. A man of power would have maintained the visage that was of the animal, the very last. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I'm interested in what you guys think of that story. But to me, I think there's something about power that the writer Carlos Castaneda was trying to convey, because later he says in the book, power is something that you are moved by and you also are at the center of and are and wield. You both wield it and are moved by it. And so I think there's something where, Carlos is and Don Juan are seeing power as something that it's about living in a world full of meaning, and seeing things as what's most real is not what's quantifiable in that world. And in the animistic worldview, where there are powers that you're constantly being moved by and you're interacting with and relating with, in that worldview, it's not the most real things are not what's quantifiable and measurable. The most real things are the things that are the most, I think, meaningful in your relationship to them.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful and moving. I'm feeling like so inspired by that story. Thank you so much for sharing that, and the difference between empowerment and wielding and moving with like the larger network of forces, right? And elements. I mean, look at the elements right now, the earth quaking and the floods and the fires. I mean, we're literally dealing with such elemental forces on this planet. And really acknowledging that there's a difference between power that's working together and in harmony, and like you said, imbued with meaning, and then someone having power over someone, having force and power over, and hierarchy, and telling someone what their experience is. And I think that's one of the ways that I feel like Lang is a shaman, is that he has this depth, a soul depth, in connecting with people. And yet he does also have power, and he's, really working with that. And, Stan has that too, in a different way. And so many of these great teachers. And I feel like, they say the next Buddha is the Sangha, right? So it's up to us, all of us, to empower ourselves and to be in community and support one another in becoming empowered at this time.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know. For me, two things kind of came up. Like when you're talking about the shadow and realizing that it wasn't really an animal, it was a branch. I thought about like Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Are you familiar with that story? Yeah, so just this, they're in the cave and that's their reality. These shadow creatures are real until somebody leaves and they go, oh my God, there's a whole other world out there. So, I mean, that's kind of what's real, what's not real. And then there was something like when you were talking about Don Juan, like saying like, what have you accomplished? It got me thinking like, I guess on like a soul and meaning level, right? So like, and maybe I'm thinking about this in like a psychedelic way too, but what was that experiencing meaning on a soul level if they believed it was a cat and he had that like jumping reaction of that's an animal, and it kind of made some imprint on the psyche in some way and made some meaning, and then just disrupted and say, oh no, that wasn't real. Like in those moments, what was that meaning there? What kind of impact did it have on you? And whether it was just a branch or not, it had an influence on the psyche, on the soul, right? And so I think even in the psychedelic world where, you're having these hallucinations and they're not real, they're still impacting you on a way that it's causing like a lot of influence and a lot of change in somebody's personality or openness, whatever that is. But, do we say, oh, we know how that works now. That's not real. Don't worry about it. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. What do we mean when we say something's not real? I mean, I think I'm reminded of Fritjof Capra's recent talk on the science of experience and his conversation with R.D. Laing, which he had this whole very dramatic debate that it's a great story. You should look up the video if you want to see it. But in any case, what was really interesting was that R.D. Laing was very upset, kind of attacking Fritjof Capra, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, at this conference for being a scientist who felt like he had anything to say about spirituality or about experience. He said, how dare you, a scientist, talk about these things? And then Lang goes on to say, science has always been basically fucked since Galileo, who proposed the idea that the only thing that is real is quantifiable. In order to be real, it had to be quantifiable. So Lang felt like this was the most incredible violence that we could commit upon the world. He said, you see, because it was then that we killed the world. We had to kill the world in theory before we could kill it in practice, is what he said. And that reminds me a bit of what you were saying, Michelle, about, if we're talking in terms of power. Now, I think Castaneda was right about power. What's really powerful is to live in a world where you are capable of being moved by things greater than yourself and moving within those things. But I think what most people think of power, they think of control, and and I think when you think of that type of power, if you think about a world that you have absolute control over, all of the relationships you have absolute control over, you have dehumanized the world, dehumanized your relationships, you've taken life, you've disenchanted the entire world, and in that way you've isolated yourself, absolutely. And that I think that is so lonely. I mean, this kind of materialistic idea about the world and about reality leaves one feeling very alone, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for using the word violence or sharing that Lang did, because that's, when we're in a state, let's say it's an entheogenic state or an extreme state, a spontaneous extreme state, and someone says to you that that's not true, that's not real, it can feel violating, it can feel like violence, it can feel like a killing of that experience. Yeah. And so the reclaiming of that, the remything of that, for me was one of the most healing journeys of really saying, no, this happened, this is real, and this has meaning, and this has meaning that I'm still working with and I'm still uncovering. But for me, it comes back to the being able to be there for others, and being able to have an empathy and a compassion that, had I not have gone through it, I may not have understood it. And I understand that Western medicine, they have an intention to also heal. And I understand that. And it is because of materialism. It is because of this lineage of the West that we've inherited, right, that has disenchanted our worldview. And, the reclaiming of, or I would say even evolving, right, to the next level, the next paradigm, the new paradigm includes a re-enchantment, and a reconnection with all of these realms and all of these powers and all of these beings that want to support us in doing this work.
I think Groff has a paper about re-enchantment.
Sure, I'm sure. I'm probably just, bringing through things I've learned over the years.
Yeah, this is such an interesting conversation. I keep thinking about like my time at Soteria and like some of the experiences that I had there, and people coming in and feeling so violated within the mental health system, and then coming to like this kind of sanctuary house and almost like not knowing how to express themselves or just be, because they felt like we were like another step down program and part of the system, when really we were there to support them in their process of just being.
This episode is brought to you by Entheozen, makers of Transzen. Very cool product made up of minerals, herbs, and vitamins. It's got a great blend of stuff, and it's kind of got a lot of stuff that I would just want to take all the time anyway. And it's a lot of people use it as kind of like a choose your own adventure dosage. Some people only take one a day, but the serving size, when you look at the label, you'll go, oh, that's a lot of B vitamins. And you don't always need to do that. But say, for example, if you're me and you went partying, you might need to recover. You might need to do a little bit of extra. Sometimes what you do is just eat a salad or eat a lot more the night before. Sometimes that wasn't enough and you need a little bit extra, and this does help. I wouldn't be surprised if you did various research chemicals or drank too much, if this would help too. So, worth experimenting on your own. But, check it out. See what you think. I really appreciate it, and we'd love to hear what you think. So again, thanks to Entheozen for sponsoring the show. More again later.
What you're saying, I think in kind of having this conversation being a little bit in the context of talking about Gnosis Retreat Center and psychedelics and all of that. There's such a great connection between all of these things, and I think also though that I wouldn't want to over romanticize all of it, because I think that there's a way in which all of these experiences are very real and meaningful, and I think also there are other things that accompany some of the more chaotic expressions of these experiences. An incredible sensitivity can come with it. I think a distrust can come with kind of what we were talking about earlier in terms of staving people away, people that feel like threats for any number of reasons. Just a distrust. I mean, for instance, that they weren't that many people weren't able to kind of experience soteria for what it seemed really to be, which was that it was a place, a sanctuary where people could have their experience, go through it.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is just totally new, and we were all trying to figure it out together. But yeah, I mean, the intersection of all of this is that, I think creating these sanctuary houses for people in quote unquote extreme states, and whether that is like spontaneous or through psychedelics, I mean, I think the real question is how do we sit with people? And, you could view that as, say, like, Zendo. How do you sit with somebody in a really difficult psychedelic experience? How do you be with somebody that's experiencing like a spiritual emergence process? And I think that's like, maybe what Gnosis and some of these alternative places are. We're trying to figure out like a new narrative of like mental illness and really how to be with people. Reframe it, which is kind of controversial. I mean, we're we're the black sheep of the mental health community of some sort, but oh,
absolutely. I mean, I think the mainstream mental health community thinks that we're crazy. I mean, what we're talking about,
certifiable, in fact.
But I think they're crazy.
Exactly. It's all perspective.
Yeah. I think it's I think that in terms of how to sit with somebody, there is no how to. There's no in terms of instructions or a technique about it. I think there's something. It's arguably much more complicated than all of this, but I think there is an esoteric kind of truth or a Zen kind of truth that how do you sit with someone going through something like this? Well, I think at first you have to be, and Michelle, I'm very interested in what you think about this. You have to be. Is it okay with you that this person is experiencing these things? Is it okay with you that they continue to experience these things? And I think that's one of the wonderful things I really like about Zendo, is that we're interested in providing a long-term space for people, where people can stay as long as they need. And that, I think, is really important, because it's built into the whole foundation of the retreat center, is an attitude that we don't have. Now, this isn't really good publicity, but we don't have a good we don't have a goal, an absolute goal of like, how are we going to get this person to stop experiencing delusions or hallucinations or whatever. We're not thinking to ourselves, how are we going to get them to stop experiencing these things? That's not the idea. So if we replace that idea with, how do we have a relationship with the people living here? Well, that's not a goal in any kind of the same way. That's how can you be with a person? And now, ironically, though, paradoxically, I think that this is the most healing thing. And I think I would bet I'd bet all my money on the idea that this has probably the greatest chances of whatever measure of success you want to use. But I think using those measures of success, being preoccupied with those things, even having them in the back of your mind, undermines the whole enterprise. Which is why I think it's kind of that esoteric Zen kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right on there. I saw some really great healing done when I was at Soteria. And then I think, since there wasn't any structure in the beginning and we were all trying to figure out what's going on, and nobody had a mental health background really, because it was really just peer support. People might have had like a lot of lived experience, but there's nobody with like credential background at the time. And but it was really based on what you were saying, like being in relationship and just kind of being with it. And then I got to a point where there needed to be some sort of structure. At least like the admin wanted more structure to it. And I think that's like when things got really tense. And I don't know how they're doing now. It's been a while since I've been there, but I'm hoping that they're doing well. But yeah, it's like we weren't allowing sometimes that relationship to unfold, because it was like this, we were like, we don't have a goal, but we have a goal, and it got really weird. Where it's like, what are we doing? Like some days we'd go in and the relationship would be, okay, we know what we're doing. And then other times we'd be like, what the fuck are we doing here? It was really confusing. And, we weren't really operating off of like any theory or background. Like, are you guys going to be approaching this with some sort of theory or Langian theory or anything like that? Or are you guys going to be peer support? Like, I don't know, how are you approaching it?
Well, it's I'm very thankful that we have people who have lived for decades at these houses, and I think a lot of what helps these things operate is wisdom, experience, and thinking about these things. If we're talking about theory, we're a community that's very interested in theory, because I think it's a way of connecting to aspects of our experience that might otherwise be not the lowest hanging fruit. Theory, I think, helps us get there. It gives us, it can give us kind of a way to locate ourselves or connect with a person who might seem at face value different, but if we're looking at certain, like when I read if you read R.D. Laing's book, The Divided Self, or The Politics of Experience, Those, I mean, R.D. Laing was the most famous psychiatrist in the 1970s, and beyond that, I think as well. But but in large part because even though he was someone who, I mean, look at what he was interested in. He was interested in madness. He was interested in helping people that no one else was interested in helping. And yet he was all the same the most famous psychiatrist of his time. But why is that? Is because I think his books, if you read The Divided Self, yes, it was talking about madness, but it was also talking about human experience. It was talking about the experience of being a person in a society that is interested in constricting what you're allowed to experience. And that's a lot. I mean, that's what Freud was talking about, I think, in Society and Its Discontents, was the function of society in repressing certain aspects of your impulses and experience. So what's even better than repressing your impulses, Lang points out, is repressing any awareness that you even had an experience of that impulse to begin with. So you mystify yourself, you get into the business of mystifying other people, and then we're all kind of struggling with divided selves, because we identify with aspects of ourselves that feel okay in certain contexts. We disidentify with other aspects of our experience, and those aspects of our experience struggle to emerge and find expression. But anyone who reads The Divided Self could relate to that. And yet it's supposedly about the schizoid character structure. But that's the character structure of pretty much everybody.
Mm-hmm. I would say that it resonates so much with Jung too, and I know that Jung and Freud had their own process that they went through relationally, and Jung had his own spiritual emergence process with the Red Book, and I would say that a lot of what we who are touched in this way by madness or spiritual emergence or sensitivity or really deepening into subcultures, right, is that we are working shadow. We are shadow workers. We are light workers. We're working the edges of things and coming into contact with disowned parts of ourselves and collectively, the collective shadow. And so I feel like some of these trickster kind of characters are the guardians, right, of these liminal spaces. And I see Lang in that way.
As a trickster?
Mm-hmm, yeah. I do. Yeah.
Have you ever read Arnie Mandel's book, The City Shadow? That's a fascinating book. But it's kind of like a overall criticism of like the mental health system and just doing shadow work. But he has I think the overall theme is that it was kind of like what you were saying about like Lang, of needing to like suppress even some of these impulses. So the city kind of like suppresses some of the internal psyche stuff, and that wants to be expressed, and in turn that creates the schizoid, right? It creates the mania. So like these structures and the city, quote unquote, is actually creating all this mania. And I mean, it's pretty ironic that most developed countries have higher rates of schizophrenia than the less developed countries.
Yes, right. I mean, I think it's a whole expression of something that happens in more and more developed societies. A developed society is one that probably has a more elaborate, sophisticated mechanism to control people. And I think here we can get into a criticism of society, of cities, of all these things, and imagine that this is something that's happening to us. But I think that would be a bit of a mistake. I think one of the interesting.
Wow.
What is that?
I have no idea what
that's
that
called
was.
infinite regress, and I don't know but I feel, to me, that feels like there was something that just happened. So
Weird.
that's how I take it. There's something important in what you're saying.
Yeah, maybe infinite regress has something to do with what I'm saying here. But I think one of Lang's contributions as well was that this kind of schizoid response is not simply a reaction that is predetermined. It's a way that maybe even a brilliant way that people find to cope, to navigate through. So there's a kind of a radical existential philosophical idea that madness and much of experience, a lot of this comes from Sartre, is actually a choice. Now that's very radical. I mean, no one's going to immediately agree with that unless they're an existentialist. But I think to summarize how I kind of understand that is that I think that there's nothing biological, there's nothing environmental, there's nothing societal that can force or determine you, or can be an absolute cause that makes you be the way that you are. The point of some of these existentialists like Sartre is that there's nothing that actually constricts your freedom. You are always inexorably free in the context of your own experience and how you navigate that. So what do we take from all of that? What's helpful about that, I think, is that when someone's going through something like this, the idea is not that they could simply choose not to go through it. That's
right.
not the idea at all. To say something's a free choice doesn't mean it doesn't mean you have kind of a top-down control over that choice. It's actually a very radical point to point out that we don't have that top-down control over any of our choices. We're always kind of we're kind of riding the wave of our unconscious. We're always being motivated by unconscious forces to begin with, but we can reflect on them and identify with them or not identify with them. But someone going through an experience of madness, what this says, what the radical point that this makes is that this is an expression of who they are. This is an expression of them. So it's not. We don't have to go in and invade them biologically to fix something. What we need to do is, if we're interested in doing so, try to understand.
Exactly. This resonates so much with the neurodiversity movement, that there are so many ways, that these unique ways of expression, and it's not neuro in the terms of simply mind, but embodied expression of our consciousness, and that what normal is, right? It has these same concerns in terms of social justice that other ways of being, like cultural, racial, gender, sexuality, all of these things. So the way that we express our consciousness also has these ways of control or oppression that might show up. And so it's a conversation about freedom. It's a conversation about power. It's a conversation about engagement with forces, like we were talking about. And the other thing that arose in your share for me was in working in the Akashic record, when we zoom out and we see the multi-lifetime patterns and we see the contracts, we can actually work with the way that we actually, for me, the way I experience this work is that there is volition, there is a will to say, this is sort of a context that is going to allow me, this is the garden, right, of these experiences, that I'm going to grow in a particular way and experience certain things that my soul wants to experience. And it is radical. It is radical, because then that kind of makes the victim perpetrator situation very complex, but it also allows for compassion in a way that is radical. And it also requires radical responsibility. And I think that compassion and responsibility in this time, what's going on culturally, as we can see things are coming to the surface, and all of this integrity, I think that is so necessary and is sometimes lacking. I think we can reclaim that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's radical. I mean, if it works for you, it works for you, right? I mean, I was thinking about the last few years of like the astrology language and archetypal language has been so helpful for me in terms of this whole Saturn thing of like watching my whole life crumble in some sense, but also building it back up. And that archetype of Saturn, working with that, just made me feel sane. I was like, okay, this is a process. And then looking back at Groff's work of like, all right, I'm stuck in this BPM2, the walls are closing in, it's a birthing process, I'm going to get through it. If I didn't think like that, I don't know, might have drove me a little bit nuts. Or maybe if I didn't even have that language, maybe I wouldn't be so aware of it. But that's a paradox in itself. But, you know, I think that it worked for me to just stay grounded during all this insanity that was happening in the past, like 2 years. I'm like, oh my God, like just too much change and too much chaos, where I'm like, okay, this makes sense. This is a process. It's in the charts.
Exactly.
Yeah, meaning out of it. And you know, what I find is really kind of the opposite of something like that is to feel like it's a meaningless experience, you know, that it's like something that your brain is doing to you. That to me it is relatively sterile and meaningless. I mean, the brain, to me, it baffles me that this is a really kind of common way to think, that your own brain could do something to you. When in my mind, when someone says, "Oh yes, it's a part of someone's brain," that to me is like saying, well, it's an aspect of who they are, and that would be the better way to say it. But when you say it's that your brain is doing something to you, you're subjected to the activity of your brain. That to me is what really a lot of what Lang's talking about in terms of the divided self. We've dehumanized even something so integral to our experience as the brain. I mean, the brain is one expression of our experience. I wouldn't say it's the first causer or anything like that. There are so many more meaningful ways to think about that. Exactly.
And I think part of the reenchantment is really bringing spirit back into matter, right? So it's like, yes, there are chemical processes that are happening, like when we take an entheogen, for example, something does happen chemically. But to say that it's just because of that, no, it's just like saying that the planet's moving and aligning in a certain way, it's causal. No, I mean, I studied with Rick, and he says no, it's synchronistic. It's happening. These things are related at the same time, and so it's a pattern that's moving. And so it's like, yes, the pattern of what's happening in my brain is connected to the planets, is connected to the plant, is connected to my heart, and the relationships in the room at the moment. So yeah, I think that seeing it as it's all happening simultaneously with meaning and with I don't know. I would say with some underlying wisdom, and that for me is helpful. That for me is a tether when things feel like they're falling apart, or when I'm falling apart, or when I feel like I'm being crushed, or when I feel like I'm flying into bits in space, right? All of these different ways of experiencing that. When I come back to the fact that it's a process, and the fact that I'm connected to a larger community of structures, of beings, of this web of, micro to macro, right? It feels like there's something bigger that's happening, that's moving through me, and that helps me to stay grounded.
Love it. So I'm looking at the time, and I realize that we've been recording for over an hour. I don't know, my time, it seems like not that long. It seems like we just hit like a time warp of some sort. Yeah, and I mean we didn't get into some more stuff about the psychedelic world and some of the stuff that we talked about in the beginning that we might have want to touch on, but that's okay. We can always come back and re-record something. Yeah, we'll do another one.
Part two. Exactly.
Yeah, part two. So maybe just to wrap up, what's the timeline of Gnosis? Like, where are you at? Like, do you have a physical location? Like, what will be the admission criteria? Because I'm thinking too, if we're talking about like if this is going out to the psychedelic community and people are kind of in that Bay Area, could somebody with like a really powerful experience that might catapult them into some sort of spiritual emergence, could they come once you're open up? And
yes, yeah, I think absolutely it would be. So to answer your first question, the timeline is, I would say, slightly uncertain. We have really great momentum of interest and of kind of ongoing events right now. But what we need in order to get going is someone interested in financially helping us get a house. We don't have a house right now. Also, what we're looking for is to create a wait list of people who would be interested in living in a place like this. And for I think there are tons and tons of people out there who have an ongoing struggle with connecting to other people, relating to other people, connecting to what other people consider real. And they're out there on medications and just kind of making it by. Perhaps they're intermittently in the hospital. Perhaps the medication's helping them kind of dampen things down. Maybe it's not at all. They're mostly making things by, and they're interested in actually in having more rich and fulfilling life with relationships to people who aren't going to try to control or change them. So we want to hear from those people. We want to talk to them, to see if we can create a wait list. And if we can create a wait list, that will go a very long way in helping us get a house. We do have a couple people on that list already. We have the staff lined up, and we have basically a very rich community of people who are very well equipped to and very interested in being available for this kind of thing.
And how would somebody reach out to get put on a wait list?
Well, they could email me directly, or the director, Michael Guy Thompson. Should I say my email? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
If you want to share it, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, my email is jnorwood91@gmail.com. So J and then N as in Nancy, and then Orwood, and 91@gmail.com. So if anyone's interested, they can email me, and then I'll be sure to respond right away. They can also check out Gnosis Retreat Center's website, which is gnosisretreatcenter.org. And Gnosis, I should note, is spelled with a G at the beginning, Gnosis. So that has a lot of information on it. Some blogs that we do. Connor Tyndall, a man who works closely with me on the project, just wrote this wonderful blog called Being With versus Doing To. Some of what we've been talking about today. So if anyone is in the position that I was talking about, or knows somebody like that, or they can reach out to me or Michael Guy Thompson, michaelguythompson@mac.com. And then the other thing that we do is we do Gnosis in-home services, which is kind of like, in some ways, it's like Zendo for people going through a crisis. So for some people, this kind of struggle with relationships in reality. It's not a constant and ongoing thing. For some people, it's more of an intermittent, intense kind of thing. And for those people, we would really encourage them to reach out to us and talk to us so that they can so we can help them prepare for their next crisis if they know they're prone to them. Because what we'll do is we'll have a team of a couple. We're calling them life coaches because it's an easy word to use. But,
unregulated too.
It's an unregulated word to use. So we'll have a team of 2 people come to the house and provide an alternative to being hospitalized or medicated if that's not wanted. Because I think a lot of times in these crises, what people need the most is space and people to be with them in an unintrusive way through it. So the best thing to do for that, if you know you're prone to crises, is to reach out to us ahead of time. Even if you don't get a chance to reach out to us ahead of time, you can call us anytime. We basically have a team available 24/7.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's those are the 2 main things. I would say as far as the house is concerned, once we get that wait list filled up, we'll be very shortly ready to go within just a few months. But beyond that, if I can also mention there's this great movie that we're going to be showing on February 4th about R.D. Laing, called Mad to Be Normal. We've actually been given the rights to do the West Coast premiere of this movie. And we're going to be doing it at the Legion of Honor, the Gun Theater at the Legion of Honor Museum in San Francisco. So it's at noon on February 4th. It's Super Bowl Sunday, but we're doing it before the Super Bowl, so you can still come. And we have a panel discussion with people who lived and worked with R.D. Laing. So it's going to be a really beautiful venue and a great time. So yeah, I'd invite everyone to come out to that. We have a party tomorrow. I don't know when this is going out, but yeah, we have a party tomorrow at Elixir in SF. I'll be bartending, and the tips go to Gnosis Retreat Center. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. And Gnosis also has a Facebook page too that people can get updates on.
Yeah. I'm constantly posting on there. So, sorry about that.
Cool. Yeah, no worries.
Follow us on Facebook. You'll get to come to all the events that way.
Cool. Thanks. And how about you, Michelle? You want to toss anything out there?
Just also to mention the summer conference, the R.D. Laing in the 21st Century, like it's such a powerful time where speaking of community, it's like being together for 5 days and having talks and the breath work and time to be with one another with, over food and the tubs and hiking and all of that. But most of all, really sharing with one another both, from our lived experience and theoretical, and how to work and how to be and how to continue to develop this vision. So it's a wonderful time, and that's going to be at the end of July.
Nice. And is that the Lang conference down at Esalen?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, last year it was at Esalen because of what was going on with Esalen, but we'll be back at Esalen this summer. So
awesome. Cool. Any other links that you want to toss out? Creating Sacred Space is your site, right?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we can post maybe in the description on the YouTube is also the Gnosis new video that we've posted that talks a little bit more about it and introduces some of the other folks that are involved in the project too. So maybe we'll post that as well.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And this was a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Thanks again for listening to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore. We really appreciate you listening. If you want to learn more about Psychedelics Today and what we do, check us out, psychedelicstoday.com. We offer online classes. Kyle's running a live one right now, but we have a pre-recorded version that gets you access to our secret Facebook page. If you are interested in learning more, reducing harm, reach out. It's probably worth at least one of your friends knowing this information. And we just put out 2 new ebooks to help supplement the education there. There's a trip journal and kind of a workbook. So stuff to help you understand what's going on and where you might go. Also, if you're interested in joining us in Jamaica, there's still spots available, but we are selling them quickly. We're going to be in Jamaica with Myco Meditations doing a legal mushroom retreat from May 16 through 23. Hit us up if you have any questions, psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com. We've been running some free webinars to kind of share some info, so keep an eye out for those as well. But yeah, really, if you have any questions and you're interested, just reach out. We'd love to chat with you about it. Again, May 16 through 23 of this year in Jamaica, Treasure Beach in particular. And Eric Osborne has been on the show a number of times before. Catherine McLean was on the show talking about her experience down there, and it seems like a very magical place. Kyle and I are very excited to be down there for our first time, and hope it's not our last. So if you're interested, hit us up. We'd love to have you. Take care, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, special thanks to Entheozen, makers of Transzen. Great supplement. We both really like it. It's a mood enhancement and stress support supplement with a lot of great ingredients. Helps with your oxidative stress, filling in nutritional gaps, promotes neurogenesis, and healthy inflammatory response. So inflammation is obviously one of the biggest diseases of our day, and this really can help with that. And neurogenesis is a big deal too. So we talk about that with psychedelics, but imagine if you had a supplement that could even accelerate that process. And Caitlin Thompson, the maker of this product, has a great background in neuroscience and was able to kind of curate top-notch ingredients at the right ratios for this supplement. And it helps with all these things. Which is lovely. It's kind of the supplement I've had for 20 years, But thankfully we have it now. It's part of the arsenal, and people don't need to needlessly have hangovers that they can get rid of, or help them get out of funk. I think nutrition is a big deal with psychedelic integration, and that a supplement like this could really, really help people come back down from their extreme psychedelic session and move back into it. So again, really hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned for next week. We've got some really awesome guests lined up, and I think you're going to love it. Check us out, psychedelicstoday.com, if you want to help us out. Give us a review on Facebook or iTunes. Sign up to our email list, or maybe just buy a t-shirt on our shop. All right, thanks everybody, and take care. Joe Moore signing off.